a quote from your book, I think it is, you said data is a strategic resource like oil in the 20th century, and we need a national security policy around it. Can you explain that concept to people, especially people that might not be able to understand what you're talking about when you say data is as important as a commodity?
Yeah, well, so oil really surpassed economic benefit to really drive geopolitics. And part of the apparatus around that was really about establishing, geographic dominance in markets and using, the apparatus of the U.S. military to protect, those flows of oil in the 20th century. A lot of what we did geopolitically was on the basis of oil. What you see coming into view after the creation of the iPhone and really the deployment of 4G networks is this whole shift from an industrial economy globally to a more of an e-economy or an information economy. And that not only creates economic benefit, as we've seen Facebook, Amazon, and Google vault to the top of the capex in or not capex, but the size of the market. You've seen that profitability go to those companies, it's created geostrategic and geopolitical challenges. It's created challenges in Europe in terms of the GDPR, Global Data Protection Regulation, that's really concerned about Europeans' privacy. So if you just look at the fact that American companies are so globally dominant in the information economy using kind of the 4G world where the smartphone's the platform for computing and the 4G network is a pipe. And then you understand that rather than, as Clinton said, controlling the internet will be like nailing Jello to the wall when he was talking about bringing China into the community of nations. When you realize they've actually figured out how to nail Jello to the wall, and they've adopted those same technology and business models of Silicon Valley and are deploying that in a new way to dominate the next iteration of telecommunications and computing, that you realize that not only can they have the ability to be economically dominant, but now they can begin to be geopolitically and geostrategically dominant. And that is really the transition of national security from more of a physical sense in terms of ships and planes and tanks, and more of a digital sense in terms of you can go right into somebody's living room. You can go right into their place of work. You can go right into their, everyday activities and begin to influence their consumption patterns, their thought patterns, and the way they view the world. This is the power that Silicon Valley has brought us. And we thought, just as Clinton stated, that it would promote democracy. And what we've seen is the Chinese Communist Party has been very capable of taking that and using it in ways that are being copied all over the world to create this platform for influencing people in ways that are counter to their interests, but that is imperceptible to them when it occurs.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you ask the average person on the street, in general, what is cyber warfare? Are you in danger from China? Most people would say no. They're like, yeah, every now and then I read in the newspaper that some US corporate was hacked, and every now and then I heard about some Russian bots that may or may not have influenced an election, but I love my Facebook, and I really don't think that's a threat. I mean, I would say that's probably 80% of the public out there. And the things they do worry about or they pay attention to are, the gunships and the drones and the things we hear about. But you're telling me it's the opposite. These people, these regimes are actually in your living room, controlling your thoughts, and you don't even know it.
Absolutely. And I use the example quite frequently of the protests in 2016, before and after the elections. Many of them were, ostensibly on the basis of either people that disliked the president or, in one in particular, I think it happened 4 days after the election, 15 to 20,000 people in New York City marched to Trump Tower It was put together by a Facebook group called Black Lives Matter. And in fact, it was the Russian using AI bots, social media networks, and big data to kind of bring this protest together. So those people, those 15 to 20,000 people marching together, thought that they were marching on behalf of their own, beliefs and interests, and really, and what they were doing was becoming proxies for the Russian government to essentially sow dissent in the United States. This is the power that that these tools bring to these kinds of regimes. Now, for a lot of time, we've not seen that from the Chinese Communist Party in the United States. We've seen it in other countries. We've seen it in Taiwan. We've seen it in the Philippines. We've seen it in Malaysia, more in their own region. But this time, during the coronavirus outbreak in March, we began to see it with them sending texts, mass texts to American citizens and social media posts. And this was around a campaign to basically scare people into thinking that the federal government was about to impose martial law. So they are now beginning to transition from a stealth war to more of a more visible war that's really designed to, like the Russians, sow dissent and really create distrust in democratic governments everywhere. And I think you're going to see more of that coming. And we built the system. So we built that open data system and those business models and those companies around this idea that, you can influence somebody to do something, and that has the U.S. government or any other government and any other democratic government really has no say in how those platforms are operated. So this becomes very dangerous when it moves beyond just corporate motivations of corporate greed to very specific motivations about undermining the legitimate sovereignty and independence of a democratic country.
Yeah, and we've seen those kind of like small bot armies, like you said, have massive effects on people, on protests, on potentially elections. I heard about these mass text messages from China, getting people to obviously mistrust the government and so panic. It's very real. I had a guest here on London Real who was considered Vladimir Putin's #1 enemy. And I mean, we published a lot of YouTube videos, about 8,000 of them over the last 9 years. And it was clearly a massive amount of bots going into those comments. And I'd never seen anything like it. It was like 10x the number of comments of any other episode. And it was just fascinating to watch how they were trying to affect the influence of someone commentating about, their leader.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, I think, as I got into this when I was at the White House, I mean, it's really, I haven't been I wasn't a big wasn't focused on influence. And it wasn't really till I started looking at the Chinese Communist Party and then really understanding how they've gone after American businesses that I really started to focus on this. And when you start to understand what's going on, in a sense, we think of cybersecurity really as preventing the hacking of computers. When you think of what I'm talking about in terms of getting these people to march to Trump Tower, you're actually hacking brains, and that's what this idea of social cybersecurity is about. It's really about using these platforms and using the data in these platforms to really begin to hack people's brains, to really get them to behave in ways that are counter to their own interests without them knowing it. And that's why when you think of our society in the United States, and you think of the Constitution, you think of the Second Amendment, and you realize the Second Amendment is there to prevent a repressive government from controlling the population. But that we're in a world now where you may not know you're being oppressed, or you may not know who your oppressor is. It may not be your government, it may be a foreign government. Then we're in a world now where the digital has overcome the physical in terms of determining your freedom and independence. And in that world, a gun becomes less relevant. In fact, probably is irrelevant. And maybe, in fact, is actually dangerous because you may use it on your neighbor who's absolutely not, your enemy, but you've been convinced by somebody else, unbeknownst to you, that he or she is.
Wow. It almost makes the Second Amendment moot and maybe turns it from an asset to a liability. I guess the founding fathers didn't see this coming.
Well, they couldn't. How could they know about, the internet? I mean, it's a phenomenon that we've thought was for an ultimate good that has created the power when you aggregate data, and that's where you begin to, drive these algorithms and artificial intelligence and machine learning, platforms to really understand how to, take that data and make it into information that's usable in a specific way. When you see what Silicon Valley has built in that, and you realize the power of that, everybody was freaking out about Cambridge Analytica, but that's a